Will Smith sat in his living room looking out at the view of Los Angeles from his large glass windows. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. But Will was not paying attention to the beautiful sight. His eyes were fixed on his phone, and his face showed his anger. He scrolled through yet another article about Clint Eastwood's recent interview. The old director had been talking about actors today compared to actors from his time. "These new guys just don't have what we had," Clint had said. "They rely too much on special effects and not enough on real acting skills." Will threw his phone onto the couch. Clint had not mentioned him by name, but Will felt like the comments were aimed at him and other actors his age. After 25 years in Hollywood, Will had won many awards. He had proven himself as both a funny actor and a serious one. Yet here was Clint Eastwood, acting like Will and his friends were not real actors. "This is not right," Will said to himself. He picked up his phone again and called his agent. Greg Patterson answered on the third ring. "Will, what's up? It's almost 8 at night. Have you seen what Clint Eastwood said about modern actors?" Will asked, not bothering to say hello first. Greg sighed. "Yes, I saw it, but he didn't mention you specifically, so I wouldn't worry about it." "Everyone knows he was talking about guys like me," Will said. He got up and began pacing around his living room. "I've worked hard for years. I've done serious movies, I've done funny movies. I've even done that movie where I had to act all by myself in the woods for most of it. And he still thinks guys from his time were better." "That's just how older people talk," Greg said. "They always think things were better in their day. Just ignore it." Will stopped pacing. A slow smile spread across his face. "I have a better idea. We're both going to be on The Tonight Show next week, right?" "Yes," Greg said, his voice showing he was worried about what Will might say next. "I'm going to challenge him to an acting contest," Will announced. "Right there on the show, live on air. The audience will vote on who's better." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Greg, are you still there?" "Will, that's a terrible idea," Greg finally said. "Clint Eastwood is a legend. He's 94 years old. He's won Oscars for both acting and directing. You can't challenge him like that." "That's exactly why I should challenge him," Will said. His mind was already racing with ideas. "It will be friendly. Just a fun segment for the show. But it will give me a chance to show him and everyone else that actors today are just as good as actors from his time." "I really don't think—" "Call the producers," Will interrupted. "Tell them I want to suggest a special segment. An acting challenge between me and Clint. The audience will love it." Greg sighed again. "Fine, I'll call them. But I still think this is a bad idea." Will ended the call and went to his home office. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. He needed to start planning. This had to be perfect. An hour later, his doorbell rang. Will looked up from his laptop, surprised. He wasn't expecting anyone. He went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Lisa Miller, his publicist. Will opened the door. "Lisa? What are you doing here so late?" Lisa walked in without waiting for an invitation. She looked worried. "Greg called me. He told me about your plan to challenge Clint Eastwood on The Tonight Show. I came right over." "And?" Will asked, closing the door. "And it's a terrible idea," Lisa said. She put her purse down on a table and faced Will. "Clint Eastwood is not someone you want to mess with. He's been in this business for over 60 years. He doesn't play games." Will shook his head. "That's exactly why this will work. He's old school. He won't expect my approach." "What approach?" Lisa asked. Will smiled. "I'm going to suggest a simple acting challenge. Nothing too crazy. Maybe we each have to act out a scene from a famous movie. Or maybe we have to make up a scene on the spot. The audience will vote on who does better." "And you think you'll win?" Lisa asked. "I know I will," Will said. "Look, Clint is a great actor. No one is saying he isn't. But his style is from a different time. It's all squinting and talking in a low voice. Today's audiences want to see real emotion. They want actors who can show a full range of feelings. That's what I do." Lisa looked at him for a long moment. "Will, I've been your publicist for 10 years. I've never seen you like this. Why is this so important to you?" Will sat down on his couch. Because I'm tired of not getting respect from guys like him. I've been in this business for a long time now. I've done all kinds of movies. I've stretched myself as an actor. But guys like Clint still see me as just that kid from my old TV show or just an action movie star. Lisa sat down next to him. So this is about proving yourself? It's about getting the respect I deserve, Will said. And showing everyone that actors today are just as good as actors from any time. Lisa nodded slowly. Okay. If this is really what you want to do, I'll help you. But we need to be smart about it. We need to make sure it comes across as a fun, friendly challenge. Not as you trying to show up a Hollywood legend. That's why I need your help, Will said, smiling at her. You always know how to make things sound good. Lisa pulled out her tablet from her purse. Let's start working on the pitch for the show's producers, and we need to think about how to present this to Clint's team. They might not be on board right away. They'll be on board, Will said. Clint won't back down from a challenge. That's not his style. Meanwhile, across town, Clint Eastwood was in his modest office at his production company. He was reading a script for a new movie he was thinking about directing. The office was simple, with just a desk, a few chairs, and some pictures on the walls showing scenes from his long career. His assistant, Nancy Baker, knocked on the door. Mr. Eastwood, I just got a call from the Tonight Show producers. They have an unusual request. Clint looked up from the script. What kind of request? Will Smith is going to be on the show the same night as you next week. He's suggested a segment where the two of you have some kind of acting challenge or contest. Clint's expression didn't change. He just raised one eyebrow slightly. Is that so? Nancy nodded. They wanted to know if you'd be interested in participating. They said it would be a fun way to compare acting styles from different generations. Clint was quiet for a moment. Then a small smile appeared on his face. Tell them I'm in. Nancy looked surprised. Really? You want to do it? Clint turned back to his script. Sure. Might be interesting to see what the kid has in mind. As Nancy left to call the producers back, Clint chuckled to himself. After more than 60 years in Hollywood, very little surprised him anymore. But this might be entertaining. The next morning, Will woke up early. His mind was already racing with ideas for the acting challenge with Clint Eastwood. He called Sam Edwards, a famous acting coach who had helped many Hollywood stars prepare for difficult roles. Sam, I need your help, Will said as soon as Sam answered the phone. I have 5 days to prepare for something big. What's the role? Sam asked. A new movie? Not exactly, Will replied. I'm going to be on The Tonight Show with Clint Eastwood next week. I've arranged for us to have an acting challenge on the show. I need to be at my absolute best. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You're challenging Clint Eastwood to an acting contest on live TV? Yes, Will said firmly. And I need to win. Sam sighed. Will, I've known you for 15 years. You're one of the most talented actors I've ever worked with. But Clint Eastwood he's Clint Eastwood. That's why I need your help, Will insisted. I need to show everyone that actors from my generation are just as good as actors from his time, maybe even better. Okay, Sam finally said. Come to my studio this afternoon. We'll start working. For the next 5 days, Will spent hours each day with Sam in his private studio. They worked on different scenes and emotions. They focused on the kind of raw, powerful acting that Clint was known for in his early films. The key is to be real, Sam told Will during their third session. Clint's power was always in how authentic he seemed. He never looked like he was acting. He just was the character. Will nodded. He was sweating from the intense session they had just finished. That's what I'm aiming for. No flash, no tricks, just pure emotion. But while he said this to Sam, Will was thinking something different. He was developing a plan. He would suggest a scene about confrontation, something raw and intense that would catch Clint off guard. Will would show off his full range of emotions from quiet anger to explosive rage. It would be the kind of modern, intense acting that would make Clint's old-school style look outdated. Let's try something different, Will suggested to Sam. Give me a scene where someone has betrayed me. I want to start calm but end up showing how deeply hurt and angry I am. Sam nodded and began to outline a scenario. Will threw himself into it, starting with a quiet, controlled performance and slowly building to an emotional climax that had Sam raising his eyebrows in surprise. When they finished, Sam was quiet for a moment. "That was intense," he finally said. "But be careful, Will. Sometimes less is more, especially with someone like Clint." Will just smiled. "Trust me, this is going to work." Meanwhile, across town, Clint was having lunch with his friend Alan Howard, another director who had been in Hollywood for decades. "So I hear you're going to be in some kind of acting contest with Will Smith?" Alan asked, as they ate at a quiet restaurant where celebrities could dine without being bothered. Clint nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "That's what they tell me." "Are you preparing anything special for it?" Alan asked. Clint looked up, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "What's there to prepare for?" Alan laughed. "Well, I hear Will's been training with Sam Edwards all week, taking it very seriously." "Is that so?" Clint said, his expression not changing. "You're not worried?" Alan pressed. Clint set down his coffee cup. "I've been in front of cameras for over 60 years, Alan. Either I know what I'm doing by now or I never will." Alan nodded. He had known Clint long enough to understand what he wasn't saying. Clint didn't need to prepare because he wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He was secure in who he was and what he had accomplished. "Well, it should be interesting to watch," Alan said. "That's interesting," Clint replied, one of his favorite phrases that could mean almost anything. As the day of the show approached, news of the planned segment leaked to the press. Entertainment websites began running stories about the upcoming showdown between Will Smith and Clint Eastwood. "Hollywood generations clash," read one headline. "Smith challenges Eastwood. Old school versus new school," declared another. Will saw all of this and smiled. His plan was working perfectly. Everyone would be watching. He imagined the headlines after the show. "Smith outshines Eastwood in surprise face-off," or "New generation proves superior as Smith wows audience." On the day before the show, Will had one final session with Sam. "You're ready," Sam told him after they finished. "Just remember to stay grounded and authentic. That's what Clint is known for. Don't try to overshadow him with technique, match him with honesty." Will nodded, but inside he was thinking about how his emotional performance would make Clint's famous stoicism seem flat and outdated by comparison. "Thanks for everything, Sam. I feel good about tomorrow." That night, Will had trouble sleeping. He kept going over his strategy in his mind. He would be respectful, of course. Clint was a legend, after all. But he would also show everyone that acting had evolved, that actors today had a depth and range that wasn't common in Clint's era. On the day of the show, Will arrived at the studio early. He spent extra time in hair and makeup, making sure he looked perfect. He chose a stylish but understated suit, nothing too flashy that might make him seem less serious as an actor. Greg and Lisa met him in his dressing room. "How are you feeling?" Lisa asked, looking slightly nervous. "Great," Will said. "I'm ready for this." "Just remember," Greg said, "keep it respectful, but don't hold back. This is your moment." Will nodded. "I know exactly what I'm doing." A production assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Smith, they're ready for your sound check." As Will was leaving, Lisa called after him. "Will, good luck." Will gave her his famous smile. "I don't need luck. I've got skill." In another part of the studio, Clint Eastwood arrived with minimal fuss. Unlike Will, he came with just one assistant, Nancy. He greeted the staff politely but quietly. He declined to spend much time in makeup, allowing them just a few minutes to get him ready for the cameras. "Mr. Eastwood?" A nervous young production assistant approached him. "Is there anything special you need for the segment with Mr. Smith?" Clint looked at the young man. "No, son, nothing special." "Do you want to know what he has planned?" the assistant asked. Clint smiled slightly. "I think I'll just see what happens." The assistant looked surprised but nodded and left. Nancy, who had been with Clint for many years, smiled to herself. She had seen that look in his eyes before. It was the calm confidence of a man who had nothing to prove to anyone. In his dressing room, Clint sat quietly, looking over the basic outline of the show that had been provided to him. He wasn't nervous. After decades in the business, very little made him nervous anymore. He was simply curious about what Will Smith had in mind. There was a knock at his door, and Jack Thompson, the host of The Tonight Show, came in. "Clint." "Great to see you again," Jack said, extending his hand. Clint stood and shook it. "Good to see you too, Jack." "So, this segment with Will Smith?" "It should be interesting," Jack said. "He seems very excited about it." Clint nodded. "I'm sure it will be fine." Jack looked at Clint carefully. "You know, we can change it if you're not comfortable with the idea." "Why wouldn't I be comfortable?" Clint asked. Jack shrugged. "Well, it's a bit unusual. An acting contest. On a talk show." Clint's eyes had a hint of amusement. "I've done stranger things in my career, Jack." Jack laughed. "That's true. Well, I'm looking forward to it. The audience is already buzzing about it." As Jack left, Clint sat back down. He wasn't worried about the segment. In his long career, he had learned that the best performances came not from trying to impress others, but from being true to the character and the moment. Will Smith was a talented actor, but if he was focused on proving something, he might miss that essential truth. Backstage, the energy was building. As the show was about to begin, Will stood ready, going over his strategy one last time in his mind. Nearby, Clint waited quietly, his calm presence a stark contrast to Will's eager energy. The stage manager approached them. "5 minutes, gentlemen." Will nodded, taking a deep breath. Clint simply gave a small nod of acknowledgement. The moment of truth was almost here. The lights in the studio were bright and hot. The audience seats were all filled. People had been excited when they found out they would see both Will Smith and Clint Eastwood on the same night. But when news leaked about the planned acting challenge, ticket demand had gone through the roof. Now the studio was packed and the energy in the room was electric. Backstage, Will took one last look in the mirror. He straightened his tie and practiced his smile. He had spent the last 5 days preparing for this moment. He was ready to show everyone that actors from his generation were just as good as those from Clint's time. A few doors down, Clint sat, quietly in his dressing room. He wasn't reviewing any notes or practicing anything. He simply sat, calm and still, waiting for his cue. The show's theme music started playing. Jack Thompson, the host, ran out onto the stage. The audience cheered loudly. Jack was a popular host, known for his quick wit and easy way with guests. "Good evening, everyone. We have an amazing show for you tonight," Jack said, smiling widely at the camera. "Two of Hollywood's biggest stars are here, and they're going to do something we've never had on this show before." The audience clapped and cheered. "First, please welcome one of the most successful actors of his generation. You know him from countless blockbuster movies. He's won awards for both comedy and drama. Please welcome Will Smith." The audience erupted in applause as Will walked onto the stage. He was all energy and charm, waving to the crowd and flashing his famous smile. He shook Jack's hand and took a seat on the couch next to the host's desk. "Will, great to have you back on the show," Jack said. "Great to be here, Jack," Will replied. "Always a fun time." They chatted for a few minutes about Will's latest projects and his family. Will was relaxed and funny, making the audience laugh several times. But there was an undercurrent of excitement in the room. Everyone knew something special was coming. "Now," Jack said, turning to face the camera again, "our second guest tonight needs no introduction. He's a Hollywood legend, an award-winning actor and director whose career spans more than 60 years. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Clint Eastwood." The audience stood up, giving Clint a standing ovation before he even appeared. When he walked out, his pace was slower than Will's had been, but he moved with purpose. His face was weathered but distinguished. He didn't wave to the crowd or play to them the way Will had. He simply nodded in acknowledgement of their applause, shook Jack's hand, and took the second seat on the couch, leaving some space between himself and Will. "Clint, it's an honor to have you here," Jack said. "Thank you, Jack," Clint replied, his voice low and gravelly. Again, they spent a few minutes on regular interview questions. Clint spoke about his latest directing project and how Hollywood had changed over the decades. His answers were shorter than Will's, but thoughtful. He didn't try to be funny, but sometimes the audience laughed at his dry observations. Will watched Clint carefully during this exchange. He noticed how the older actor never seemed to be trying to impress anyone. He just spoke honestly, in his own way. For a brief moment, Will felt a flicker of doubt about his plan, but he pushed it aside. He had worked too hard to back down now. Finally, Jack turned to address both of his guests. "So, I understand we have something special planned tonight." Will seized the moment. "That's right, Jack. I thought it might be fun to do a little impromptu acting challenge with the legend himself." He turned to Clint with a smile that was meant to show respect. "If you're up for it, of course." All eyes turned to Clint. Would he accept the challenge? Would he be annoyed by this young actor's boldness? Clint's face revealed nothing for a moment. Then he nodded with that familiar half-smile that had charmed audiences for decades. "Sure, kid." The simplicity of his response threw Will slightly off balance. He had expected Clint to say more, maybe to ask questions about what Will had in mind. But Clint just sat there waiting for Will to continue. Will recovered quickly. "Great, I thought we could do a confrontation scene. Two strangers meeting in a bar, one accusing the other of something serious." Jack looked excited. "This is going to be interesting. Let me get out of your way." He moved from behind his desk to a chair off to the side, giving the center stage to Will and Clint. A stage manager handed them each a microphone. The audience fell completely silent, everyone leaning forward in their seats. Will stood up and moved to the center of the stage. He gestured for Clint to join him. Clint rose slowly and walked over to stand facing Will. "So in this scene," Will explained, both to Clint and to the audience, "we're two strangers in a bar. I think you've stolen something very important from me, something personal." Clint nodded, saying nothing. "Should we just start?" Will asked. Clint nodded again. "Whenever you're ready." Will took a deep breath. This was it. This was his chance to show everyone what modern acting was all about. He would start calm but build to an emotional climax that would leave the audience stunned. Will changed his posture, slipping into character. His face transformed, showing suspicion and barely controlled anger. When he spoke, his voice was different too. Lower, more intense. "I've been watching you all night," Will began, his eyes locked on Clint's. "You think no one noticed you, but I did. I saw what you took." Will paused, waiting for Clint to respond. But Clint just stood there, saying nothing. The silence stretched, out for 3 long seconds. Some audience members shifted in their seats, feeling uncomfortable. Will continued, his voice rising slightly. "That locket you took from the coat check? It wasn't just some piece of jewelry, it belonged to my wife. My dead wife." Will's performance was becoming more emotional. His eyes showed pain now, along with the anger. His hands clenched at his sides. It was technically impressive acting, exactly what he had practiced with Sam. "She's been gone for 2 years now," Will continued, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. "That locket is all I have left of her, and I watched you slip it into your pocket when you thought no one was looking." Will was giving the performance everything he had. He could feel the audience's attention completely focused on him. This was working even better than he had hoped. Finally, Clint responded, but he didn't match Will's emotional intensity. He didn't raise his voice or make any big gestures. Instead, he just stood there, completely still, and delivered a single line. "I've never seen you before in my life." The line was so simple, but the way Clint delivered it was perfect. His face showed no guilt, no concern, nothing but mild annoyance at being accused by a stranger. The delivery was so authentic, so perfectly timed that the audience immediately understood the subtext, not just the character's denial, but the absolute dismissal of any need for dramatic flourish. The studio erupted in laughter and applause. Will was momentarily stunned. This wasn't how he had expected the scene to go, but he was a professional. He recovered and pressed on, increasing the emotional stakes even further. "Don't lie to me," Will said, his voice louder now, filled with pain and rage. I saw you. You think you can just take what belongs to other people? That locket had her picture in it, her picture. Will was nearly shouting now, giving a performance that would have been perfect for an emotional climax in a movie. He took a step toward Clint, his body language threatening. Clint didn't back up. He didn't match Will's volume or emotion. Instead, he simply raised one eyebrow and said, "Mister, I think you've had too much to drink." Again, the audience laughed and cheered. Clint's minimalist approach was making Will's emotional performance seem overdone by comparison. Will tried once more. "Empty your pockets," he demanded, his voice shaking with emotion. "Empty them right now, or I swear I'll—" Clint cut him off with a small gesture, holding up his hand. Then he turned slightly to address an imaginary bartender. "I'll have another drink," he said calmly. Then he turned back to Will and added, "And get this man some coffee. He needs to sober up." The audience broke into the loudest applause yet. Some people even stood up. Will stood there, not sure what to do next. He had planned to build to an even more emotional climax, but Clint's understated performance had completely changed the dynamic of the scene. What was supposed to be a showcase of Will's superior acting ability had somehow turned into a masterclass by Clint on the power of restraint. Will stood in the center of the stage, feeling sweat form on his forehead. This was not going as planned. The audience was clearly loving Clint's simple, understated performance more than his emotional acting. But Will was not ready to give up. He was a professional with years of experience. He could adjust his approach. Will took a deep breath and tried a new angle. He would tone down his performance, make it more subtle to match Clint's style. "Look," Will said, his voice quieter now, "I don't want any trouble. I just want what's mine. That locket has a picture of my wife inside. She died of cancer last year. Please, just give it back, and I'll leave you alone." It was a good adjustment. Will's performance was now more controlled, more internal. The audience was silent, watching to see how Clint would respond. Clint looked at Will for a long moment. His face showed a hint of sympathy, but also doubt. When he spoke, his voice was still calm, but there was a slight edge to it now. "I understand. Loss," Clint said. "More than you know. But you've got the wrong man." The simplicity of the line, and the way Clint delivered it with just the right amount of emotion, made it powerful. The audience could feel the weight of the words, the suggestion that Clint's character had his own painful history. Will realized he needed to change tactics again. Clint was winning this exchange with his minimalist approach. Will decided to try something completely different. "Wait," Will said, suddenly changing his body language to show confusion. You're not Frank Miller?" It was a smart move, giving the scene an unexpected twist. The audience murmured with interest. Clint paused, and for a moment Will thought he had gained the upper hand. But then Clint did something surprising. He laughed. It was a short, quiet laugh, but it was so genuine that the audience immediately laughed too. "No," Clint said. "I'm not Frank Miller, never have been." The way he said it was perfect, amused but not mocking. It made Will's character seem confused rather than threatening, changing the whole dynamic of the scene. Will tried to recover. "I'm sorry," he said, his face showing embarrassment. "You look just like him. And he took something from me. I've been looking for him for months." Clint nodded, his expression showing that he was deciding whether to believe Will's character. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an imaginary wallet. He opened it and took out an imaginary card, which he handed to Will. "Here's my driver's license," Clint said. "As you can see, not Frank Miller." The audience loved this. They laughed and applauded Clint's simple but effective use of an imaginary. Prop Will took the imaginary license and pretended to look at it. "George Wilson," Will read from the imaginary card. "You're right, I'm sorry, the resemblance is... it's amazing." Will handed the imaginary license back to Clint. He was trying to take control of the scene again, to find a way to showcase his acting skills. "No harm done," Clint said, putting the imaginary wallet back in his pocket. Then he added, with perfect timing, "But you might want to get your eyes checked." The audience erupted in laughter. It was such a typical Clint Eastwood line. Dry, slightly sarcastic, but delivered with just the right touch. Will realized he was losing the audience. No matter what he did, Clint seemed to win each exchange with less effort. Will decided to try one more approach. He would go for a dramatic ending to the scene. "The thing is," Will said, his voice growing serious again, "Frank Miller didn't just take a locket from me. He took my wife. She left me for him. The locket was a gift from me to her on our wedding day. When she died, he kept it. I just wanted something to remember her by." Will's performance was subtle now, showing deep pain but in a controlled way. It was some of his best acting, the kind that had won him awards in serious, dramatic roles. The audience was completely silent, caught up in the emotion of the moment. Will thought he had finally found the right approach. Now it was Clint's turn to respond. Will expected him to offer sympathy, perhaps even to offer to help find the real Frank Miller. But Clint did something completely unexpected. He signaled to an imaginary bartender again and said, "Check, please." It was such a perfect response to Will's emotional story that the audience couldn't help but laugh. Clint's character was essentially saying, "I don't believe a word of this and I want to leave before this gets any weirder." The audience gave Clint a standing ovation. Even Jack Thompson, watching from the side, was clapping and laughing. Will stood there, not sure what to do. He had tried everything: intense emotion, subtle performance, unexpected twists, and Clint had countered each approach with something simpler, but more effective. "And scene," Jack called out, coming back to center stage. "That was amazing. Let's hear it for these two incredible actors." The audience cheered loudly. Will smiled and bowed slightly, trying to be a good sport. Clint simply nodded to the audience in thanks. "So," Jack said, "shall we hear what our audience thought? Who won this little acting challenge?" The audience didn't need to be asked twice. They erupted in cheers and applause for Clint. The sound was deafening. Some people were even chanting Clint's name. Jack turned to Will. "What did you think of that scene, Will?" "It took some interesting turns." Will was a professional. He knew how to handle a situation like this. He smiled his famous smile and said, "That was a master class in acting." Clint showed why he's a legend. Sometimes less really is more. The audience applauded Will's gracious response. "And Clint," Jack said, turning to the older actor, "what did you think?" Clint shrugged slightly. "It was fun. Will's a good actor. He doesn't need to prove that to anyone." It was a generous comment, but also a subtle reminder that the whole challenge had been Will's idea, his attempt to prove something. Jack wrapped up the segment and sent the show to a commercial break. As the camera stopped rolling, Will turned to Clint. "That didn't go quite the way I expected," Will admitted. Clint looked at him with a hint of amusement in his eyes. "They rarely do." Backstage during the break, Will found a quiet corner to collect his thoughts. Lisa, his publicist, came rushing over to him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her face showing concern. "I'm fine," Will said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "You did well out there," Lisa said. "It's just that Clint, well, he's Clint Eastwood," Will nodded. "I see that now." Greg, Will's agent, joined them. "The good news is everyone's talking about the segment already. It's trending on social media. The bad news is they're all saying Clint schooled me," Will finished for him. Greg nodded reluctantly. "Something like that." Will sighed. "It's fine, it's all fine. I took a risk and it didn't pay off. That happens sometimes." A production assistant approached them. "Mr. Smith, you're needed back on stage in 2 minutes." Will nodded and straightened his tie. He put his game face back on. He was a professional, and the show wasn't over yet. As Will headed back toward the stage, he passed Clint, who was talking quietly with Nancy, his assistant. Clint looked up as Will approached. There was no gloating in his expression, no sign that he felt he had won anything. He simply nodded to Will, a gesture of professional respect. Will stopped. "That was quite a lesson out there," he said to Clint. Clint shook his head slightly. "Not a lesson, just 2 different styles." "Your style seemed to work better tonight," Will admitted. Clint considered this for a moment. Different tools for different jobs, he said finally. Your style works better for some roles, mine for others. It was a generous thing to say, and Will appreciated it. Thanks, he said. Maybe someday we could work together for real. On a movie, I mean. Clint nodded. Maybe so. The production assistant called to Will again. 30 seconds, Mr. Smith. Will gave Clint a nod of respect and headed back to the stage. He would finish the show with his head held high. And maybe, just maybe, he had learned something valuable, tonight. Something about acting, about humility, and about respecting those who had come before him. The rest of The Tonight Show went smoothly. Will managed to be charming and funny during his interview segment, even though inside he still felt the sting of what had happened during the acting challenge. When the show ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Will thanked Jack Thompson and said goodbye to the audience. As he walked backstage, people were looking at their phones. Will could guess what they were looking at. News of the acting challenge had spread quickly across social media. He didn't want to know what people were saying, at least not yet. Lisa met him as he headed toward his dressing room. Are you ready to go? She asked. Will nodded. Let's get out of here. In the car on the way back to Will's house, Lisa finally showed him some of the online reactions to the show. As Will had feared, most people were saying that Clint had won the challenge easily. There were memes and video clips already being shared. Eastwood schools Smith without even trying, read one trending headline. Another said, Old school acting trumps new school in live TV showdown. Will sighed and handed the phone back to Lisa. Well, that didn't go as planned. It's not that bad, Lisa said, trying to sound encouraging. People are talking about it. That's good publicity. They're talking about how Clint Eastwood made me look like an amateur, Will said. That's not the kind of publicity I was hoping for. They wrote in silence for a while. Then Will said, he didn't even try, you know? That's the thing that gets me. I spent days preparing and he just walked out there and was himself. That's his secret, Lisa said. He's always just Clint Eastwood. That's what people love about him. When they reached Will's house, Lisa asked if he wanted her to come in, but Will shook his head. I need some time alone, but thanks. Will went inside and immediately poured himself a drink. He sat on his couch and stared out at the view of Los Angeles. The same view he had been looking at when he first got the idea to challenge Clint Eastwood. It seemed like a long time ago now. His phone buzzed with a text from Sam Edwards, his acting coach. Just saw the show. Call me when you can. Will didn't feel like talking to anyone right now. He put his phone down and took another sip of his drink. What had gone wrong? He was Will Smith, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. He had prepared carefully. He had tried different approaches during the challenge, but nothing had worked. Clint had countered every move with something simpler but more effective. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe sometimes simple was better. Will had been so focused on showing off his range, on proving that modern actors had more emotional tools, that he had missed the point of acting. To be believable, to be real. Will spent the next few days avoiding the news and social media. He canceled some meetings and stayed home. He needed time to think. On the third day after the show, his doorbell rang. Will wasn't expecting anyone. He looked through the peephole and was surprised to see Nancy Baker, Clint Eastwood's assistant. Will opened the door. Nancy? What are you doing here? Nancy smiled. Mr. Eastwood asked me to deliver this to you. She handed Will a small package and an envelope. Will took them, looking confused. Thanks, is he expecting a response? He said you'd know what to do after you open it. Nancy replied. Have a good day, Mr. Smith. Will closed the door and took the package to his living room. He opened the envelope first. Inside was a short note written in Clint's neat handwriting. Will, thought you might like this. Sometimes the best acting happens when you're not trying to act. Clint. Will opened the package next. Inside was a DVD of $1 Million Baby, one of Clint's most acclaimed films as both an actor and director. It had won multiple Academy Awards. Will smiled despite himself. It was a thoughtful gift. And the note. It wasn't gloating or condescending. It was Clint sharing something he had learned in his long career. Will put the DVD in his player and sat down to watch it. As the film played, he paid special attention to Clint's performance. It was masterful in its restraint. Clint never seemed to be acting. He just was the character. When the movie ended, Will sat thinking for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Greg. "I want to do something," Will said when Greg answered. "What's that?" Greg asked. "I want to post something about what happened on the show. Something honest." Greg was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure? Sometimes it's better to just let things die down." "I'm sure," Will said. "I learned something from this experience. I want to share it." After talking with Greg, Will sat down and wrote a message to post on his social media. He worked on it carefully, wanting to get the tone just right. When he was satisfied, he posted it. "Lesson learned from the master himself," Will wrote. "Sometimes, the most powerful statement is the one you don't make." He included a picture of himself holding up Clint's DVD, smiling. The response was immediate and positive. People praised Will for his good sportsmanship and humility. The story changed from Will Smith embarrassed on live TV to Will Smith shows class in response to TV challenge. A week later, Will was reading a new script his agent had sent him when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello?" Will answered. "Will? It's Clint Eastwood." Will sat up straight. "Clint, this is a surprise." "I saw your post," Clint said. "Classy move." "Well, I meant what I said," Will replied. "I learned something valuable from our little scene." "Glad to hear it," Clint said. Then he added, "Actually, that's not the only reason I'm calling. I'm working on a new film. There's a role I think you'd be perfect for." Will was stunned. "You want me in your movie?" "If you're interested," Clint said. "It's a supporting role. Characters described in the script as a man who learns the power of silence." "Thought that might appeal to you now." Will laughed. "Was that your plan all along? To teach me a lesson and then offer me a role?" "No plan," Clint said, and Will could hear the smile in his voice. "Just worked out that way." 3 months later, Will was on the set of Clint's new film. It was a different experience than any movie he had made before. Clint as a director was like Clint as an actor, efficient, focused, and clear about what he wanted. The role was challenging for Will. His character didn't have many lines, but he had to convey a lot through his expressions and body language. It forced Will to act in a way he wasn't used to, with more restraint and subtlety. On the last day of filming, Clint approached Will between takes. "You did good work here," he said. Coming from Clint Eastwood, it was high praise. "Thanks," Will said. "I appreciate the opportunity. Not many people would have offered a role to someone who tried to show them up on national television." Clint shrugged. "We all make mistakes. The question is whether we learn from them." When the film was released a year later, critics praised Will's performance. One reviewer wrote, "Smith shows a new side of his acting ability, a restraint and depth we haven't seen before. Working with Eastwood seems to have taught him that sometimes the most powerful moment in acting is the pause between the words." In interviews promoting the film, Will was open about what had happened. "That night on The Tonight Show was supposed to be my moment to prove something," he told one interviewer. "Instead, it became a lesson in humility and in acting. Clint taught me more in those few minutes than I had learned in years." The experience changed how Will approached his craft. He still used his natural charisma and energy in some roles, but he now had other tools in his acting toolkit. He had learned the power of restraint, of saying more with less. And it all started with a plan that backfired dramatically: live on air, in front of millions of viewers.